Welcome everyone to this month's webinar, Cultivating Wellness, a workshop for care partners. My name is Donna Greening, and I'm a Programs and Services Coordinator at Parkinson Canada. Before we get started, I want to go over a few items. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. We have enabled closed captioning for the benefit of attendees who may be hearing impaired. You can turn on or off your closed captioning on your own screen by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button and then clicking on Show Subtitle or Hide Subtitle. Please note that this feature uses auto transcription, so there might be some spelling errors along the way. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A and chat buttons. After the formal part of the workshop, we'll have a few minutes to have some of your questions, including the ones submitted when you registered, answered. So if you have a question, be sure to write it in the Q&A window. The chat window is there for you to say hello and talk amongst yourselves and to reply to any questions that the workshop facilitator poses. Rest assured that your privacy will be protected. If you add anything in the chat window that the facilitator mentions, we will not include your name or any other identifying pieces of information. Now let's get started. Rebecca Higgins has worked in community and social services for over 20 years, specializing in mental health education since 2010. She has designed and facilitated workshops and webinars for a wide range of groups, including artists, library staff, tenants, security guards, business improvement associations, customer service professionals, youth, educators, and parents. In addition, Rebecca has served as a panelist and presenter at conferences, delivered keynote speeches on mental health, and provided consultation support to community mental health initiatives. Rebecca has lived and worked in Ireland, Honduras, and Brazil. She has a master's degree in social work and a BA in English. Her first book, a collection of short stories called The Color of Birds, was first published by Tightrope Books in 2018 and re-released by Iguana Books in 2020. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being with us today for this topic. So today we're talking about Cultivating Wellness, a workshop for care partners. Let me just move things out of the way a little bit so I can try to see as much as I can. Okay. So usually this is where I do the introduction and welcome, but we've done that already. So thank you again for joining us. I will invite you, of course, this is completely optional, as is everything happening in this workshop today, but I'll invite you if you have something to write on and something to write with. If you'd rather use a phone or a computer, another device, or if you'd rather just sit and reflect, that's fine as well. I'm an analog type of person and I like to use notebooks for reflections, but that's completely up to you. So the first thing I'm going to invite you to do, that's me swimming last summer, which is my very favorite activity in the world. What I'm going to invite you to do is to draw your mind map of resources. Now, in the old days, we used to just call this a flow chart, and I'm going to show you my example in a moment. But the question is, what people, places, and things are you finding supportive lately? And so I'll give you an example. Here is my mind map. So I did a handwritten version, first of all, and then I tried to make this as legible as possible. So bear with me, it looks a little rudimentary, but you get the idea. So what I did for my mind map is I put myself at the center. And as care partners, you know, you might not always be used to doing that. So that's what I'm inviting you today. Put yourself at the center. This is about support for you. And I'll invite you to draw lines, draw around the outside. You can do this however you want. You can draw the shapes first. What I tend to do is write the word, whatever the supportive thing is or the resource is, and then circle it and draw a line back to me. So this is, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is my mind map at the moment, things that I'm finding particularly supportive. You'll notice it's people, places, and things. So what I'll invite you to do is to work on your own mind map for a couple of moments to get started in terms of taking stock of your own resources. So I'll give you 3 minutes to start this process. If you like this project, it might be something you return to later, but we'll give you 3 minutes to work on it starting now. Okay, well, wonderful. That's time. So of course, you're invited to continue working on this as you like, but I'd love it if you can share, anybody wants to share a bit or two of your own mind map or your flow chart or whatever you want to call it, your resource map. If you want to pop those in the chat so others can see what you're thinking about, that's great. So I'm seeing some people in the chat, some nature. Absolutely. Animals, spiritual supports. Lots coming in. Beautiful. I won't read them all out loud, but if you're able to follow that chat yourselves and get some other ideas from other folks, that's great. Beautiful. Look at all this stuff. Wonderful. Yeah, I love, you've got a nice selection of people, places, and things as well. Yeah. And there are moments when certain things might be more supportive than others. This kind of changes over time. At least it has for me. In different moments, different things are maybe at the forefront. And that's why we have a variety of things to choose from, because sometimes what we really need is prayer, and sometimes what we really need is a walk, and sometimes what we really need is a grandchild, and so on, depending on your situation. Great. Oh, I love all the things that are coming in here. These are wonderful ideas. Okay, so I'll keep going, but keep those coming. And we're going to build on that, a different way of doing this exercise towards the end of the session. So the framework I'm going to use today to talk about self-care is called the ABCs of self-care. And sometimes when we talk about self-care, there are some things that come into play that can make it a little bit unpleasant for people. So the first thing is that sometimes it gets commodified. So sometimes we go to workshops or we hear things where it seems like we have to spend money for self-care. And that's not really very helpful for most folks. So another thing that comes into play is it feels sometimes like self-care takes a lot of time. And so I know that a lot of you don't have a lot of spare time. And so I like to invite people to take stock of what already works for them, and what already they find supportive, what's already in their life. It doesn't mean you can't add things if that's possible and if you like, but I don't want self-care to become just another to-do list. I'm interested in looking at self-care as more of a philosophy rather than a to-do list. So if you want to share me. If you want to join me in that conversation, that's great. So the first time I found this acronym, the ABCs of self-care, was years ago in reading an end-of-life book, a book on end-of-life care. And so for a while I cited that, and then I saw that this is everywhere. A lot of self-care folks talk about the ABCs of self-care. And I was like, oh, I like this frame very much. So what I do is I use the frame and I put my own stuff inside it. And so I'll invite you, if you find the frame useful, to use this in your own life and choose what works for you for each one. So we're going to look at each of these a little bit and figure out maybe how to concretize them or use them in a way that makes sense for you. So some different ways in terms of thinking about awareness. Awareness is about, one way of looking at it is it's mindfulness. It's paying attention to the present moment on purpose. So that's one lens in terms of awareness. I think awareness is about being conscious of small, beautiful moments. And I saw some great examples coming up in the chat around that. The other piece is sometimes harder to do, especially as care partners. You may find yourself feeling like you're not able to acknowledge and validate your own distress. And you have distress too, right? Absolutely. It's not just the person you're walking alongside or other people in your life that you're supporting. So part of awareness is noticing moments of distress as we experience them and being aware of our distress in a kind and supportive way, rather than judging or shoulding all over ourselves. Not swearing, shoulding all over ourselves. So the thing about that is that very often when we are supporting others, for whatever reason, in whatever experience, we have our own feelings about it. That's completely understandable. We have feelings of guilt. We have feelings of resentment. We have our regular irritations that we had with the person before. We have love. We have all kinds of different feelings that we experience. And sometimes what we do is we lean into the feelings that feel good, that are softer, that aren't as hard, and we shy away from the hard feelings. And in my experience, when we acknowledge to ourselves the hard feelings, when we put those hard feelings and share those hard feelings in a safe space, or in a way that feels safe for us, with people we trust, or in writing or online, all kinds of different ways we can do that. It can actually help us to move through them, because feelings are not permanent. Even long-lasting feelings aren't there forever. They go through different stages, they ebb and flow, just like other aspects of life. So when we're able to attend to our distress, not get lost in it or drown in it, but just noticing, this is hard for me. This is hard right now. Instead of saying, I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't this, I shouldn't that. No, you do. You do. Feelings are feelings. And telling ourselves not to have a feeling doesn't make the feeling go away. Believe me, I've tried that many times. Oh no, I shouldn't feel like this. Other people have it worse. This person is really suffering. This person has it worse. No, that's not great. I mean, it feels like we think intellectually this is going to help us, but at least for me and people I know, that invalidation of our own experience doesn't actually help us in the moment, or doesn't help us to move alongside it. So I'm not sure if any of you have seen the movie Inside Out, but it is one of my favorite, perhaps my favorite mental health movie. It's an animated movie about feelings. And I think it's really useful in lots of ways for all ages. So if you're interested in animated movies about feelings, please check it out. So that character there is, I have my own stuffed sadness. And so that is my stuffed sadness hiding under the blankets. One of the principles I like to come from is it's okay to be not okay. It's okay to feel upset, angry, sad, overwhelmed, burned out, fed up, exhausted, resentful, guilty, all of these at once, all of these in combination, in addition to other feelings as well. Not only is it okay, but it's a very understandable reaction. There is a lot of pressure on people who care for others. In lots of ways, there's a lot of pressure to be stoic, to never be, affected by our experience. And that's just not realistic. It's just not fair. It's just not true. Honor your own needs as much as you can. And as much as you can, know your limit, play within it. I stole that slogan from the Problem Gambling Council. I worked at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health many years ago. And you may have seen that slogan at the bottom of casino commercials, for example, know your limit, play within it. And I think that is really helpful in terms of any kind of care work, personal, professional, or both. It's easier said than done. Sometimes it feels like we're working way beyond our limit, and I completely appreciate that. Sometimes this isn't manageable, but sometimes we feel a lot of pressure to push past what's possible, to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and to do more than we're actually able to. In my experience, in the moments when I have done that, it hasn't actually made me a better care partner or a caregiver or a supporter. It hasn't actually done that. What it's done is just tap me out further, and it's made the work that I'm doing less sustainable. So one of the things then that we can get into in any life experience is we can get really mired in perfectionism. So for me, the more stressed I get, the more controlling I get. I'm a real delight to live with, I'll tell you that much. So the reality is life is messy, things are messy, we can't do things perfectly. Care partnering is a complex experience. It has a lot of different dimensions to it. Other kinds of caring that you may be doing in your life for other people, for animals, for the planet, and so on. All of these kinds of things are messy and complicated, and there's no way to do it perfectly. So if we set up this, it's all or nothing, it has to be perfect or it's garbage, that doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room to be good. That doesn't give us a lot of realistic space to do what we can. And there's a quote there on the screen that I like about perfectionism that I won't read out loud. Those of you who want to read it can see it. Okay, so what I'm going to invite you to do now is I'll invite you to come along with this grounding exercise for me. So let me tell you a little bit about this grounding exercise. This is something called 5-4-3-2-1. It's all over the internet. Many people have used it. Feel free to look it up if you're interested. It was initially developed as a way to support people who are experiencing post-traumatic stress and as a tool to help them anchor themselves into the current moment and ground a little bit when they were experiencing distressing thoughts and memories and visions and so on. So I invite you to modify this grounding exercise for whatever works for you. I'm going to go through all 5 senses. I recognize not everybody has access to 5 senses. So in that case, just skip the one that's not relevant for you. And you can just breathe through that one and wait for the one that makes sense for you. So I will go through all the senses and you can pick and choose how you want to do this. So I'll invite you to get comfortable as much as you can where you are right now. If you're able to, take a moment to feel your feet on the ground. This is a simple grounding tool in itself called Find Your Feet. I also like to say find your seat because sometimes that's more accessible. Pay attention to how it feels seated in the chair right now. So at this point, I'll invite you, after you're finding your feet or finding your seat, to take a deep breath in and out at your own pace. Okay, so first I'll invite you to look around the room and name to yourself 5 things you can see right now. 5 things you can see. Great. And when you finish that, take a deep breath in and out at your own pace. Next, I'll invite you to name 4 things that you can touch right now. Could be something your body's already touching, or you could reach out and touch it. 4 things you can touch. Okay, and take another deep, deliberate breath in and out at your own pace. Next, I'll invite you to name 3 things you can hear right now. 3 things you can hear. And breathe in and out. Next, I'll invite you to name 2 things you can smell right now. If you can't smell anything right now, you can name 2 things you enjoy the smell of. And take a deep breath in and out at your own pace. Finally, I'll invite you to name 1 thing you can taste right now. If you can't taste anything right now, perhaps it's a taste you already have in your mouth, or you can think of something you enjoy the taste of. 1 thing you can taste. Perfect. And to finish this grounding exercise, I'll just ask you to go back to finding your feet or finding your seat for a moment. Wonderful. So what I'll invite you to do next is I'll invite you to write down for yourself or pop in the chat or both something that comforts one of your senses, something that you find soothing to one of your senses. Beautiful. Yeah, seeing some great stuff in there. Mm-hmm. Lovely. Oh, great. So some music, food, baking, animals, delicious smells, warmth of sunshine, quiet, beautiful. These are great. And so what I invite you to do is to just make a note of these for yourself, the things that you find soothing to your senses, and see if you can notice the moments that you access them. So if it's inside, perhaps, let's say I really love the smell of lavender. So I like to make sure that I have, oh, that lavender is a bit dried out, but I like to make sure I have some lavender nearby so I can smell it. So that kind of a thing. If it's in your space, or if it's going out to find that, if you're able to, what soothes your body. I see people saying wind. That is actually, you'll see that was on my mind map. Wind is one of my primary comfort tools. It's always there and I can't do anything about it. It's not always there, but it always comes back. So the next piece I want to speak to is the most useful thing I learned in social work school. Now, that's a very expensive lesson. I did learn some other things as well, but this is the one that has always stuck with me and that I have found helpful in my own life and in supporting other people again and again. When faced with overwhelm, when faced with large things, of whatever kind, it can be very supportive to break these big things down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Do one thing at a time. This is easier said than done. Many people are called upon to be multitaskers all the time. But in fact, single tasking is better for us and often can help us to navigate that very understandable feeling of overwhelm. So breaking big things down into smaller, more manageable pieces, whether it's this piece of physical activity, or this piece of research, or this piece of support for other people. And sometimes we don't have choice around this, for sure. But faced with a big thing, there can be an awful lot of overwhelm. And when you're able to break things down into smaller, more manageable pieces, when we do this, it gives us the opportunity to have signposts along the way. So think about climbing Everest. I would never do that, but people do. People like to do that. And so if I were going to climb Everest, if I only looked at summiting as the success, as the only reason to do it, as the only piece, I would never do it, because to go from 0 to the end, 0 to 100, there's not a lot of wiggle room. And actually there's all kinds of steps, the training, the way stations along the way. We need those way stations along the way, physically and metaphorically, in our lives. So when we're able to break things down into smaller, more manageable pieces, it helps motivate us to keep moving. It helps support others, because it gives us the opportunity to have successes that we can celebrate as we go. So if anybody has an example that they want to share in the chat for others to see, that would be great, of an example of breaking something big down into smaller, more manageable pieces. It can be general or it can be more specific. And we'll come back to that in a minute. Even in a given day, there's only so much that can be done in a given day. Breaking things down into smaller, more manageable pieces helps the day be more navigable, in my experience. The next tip I want to offer is something that's been helpful for me and others I've worked with. Talk to someone you trust. Consider a trusted friend, a colleague, or a peer, a counselor, or another professional support, an anonymous call or text option, some combination of these. In my experience, saying the scary or difficult thing out loud takes away some of its power. Absolutely. Those of you who are musicians, I see, absolutely breaking it down. That might have been, even though I said I learned it in social work school, that might have been my first lesson in that, because my mom is a pianist, and we all had to take lessons when we were kids. I didn't stick to it, but I remember that, breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. And so in terms of saying the scary or difficult thing out loud, you have choices about where you put that. You can write it down, you can say it to someone you trust, you can say it to yourself as you're out walking, but putting it out there doesn't mean it's going to happen. In fact, when we put the thing out there, it takes away some of its fear. It's still a scary thing, but it takes away some of its power. And I've done this as the listener, I've done this as a speaker on many occasions. And I always surprise myself. Oh, I thought saying that was going to be the hardest thing ever. Actually saying it out loud makes it a little bit less scary. Still scary, doesn't make everything okay. None of the things I'm suggesting today make everything okay. That is not this kind of workshop. If you want an everything is okay workshop, that's not what I have. But putting it out there in a way that is supportive to you. And we choose different tools. So sometimes I'll write it in my journal. Sometimes I'll say it to a close friend. Sometimes I'll do both. There's lots of, sometimes as people who support others, it feels like there's no place to put our stuff, and we need to put our stuff somewhere. We do, not only for our own well-being, but in order to make the care work more sustainable. And for the good of our relationships as well. So my next question for you, and I invite you to jot this down for yourself in your notebook, your journal, or your piece of paper, and also share in the chat if you'd like. How do you like to move your body? So the question here, there's two pieces actually. You can choose what's manageable right now and what's enjoyable. Sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes not. I want to make sure you have the opportunity to give yourself credit for what you're already doing. So for example, I have a lot of friends with little kids at home. They're like, exercise? I don't exercise. Yeah, you do. Running around after kids all day is exercise beyond anything I do as a person without kids, just for example. Great examples. Keep popping them in the chat. What do you love to do? How do you like to move your body these days? Oh, good revelation there, that sometimes some people don't necessarily like the exercise itself, but they feel good afterwards. I see some swimmers in there and some walkers like me. Absolutely, these are great ones. Really good. And some great suggestions. Many of these, some of these activities we can do on our own when we need a break, when we need to be by ourselves. And some of these we can do with others when we need connection. These are great. Wow, wonderful. Such great examples. And I have to be honest with you here and say that for my entire life, everyone, science, the world, every person I've ever known has said to me, hey, moving around is good for your mood. And I would say, yeah, stop bothering me. I hate sports. I hate exercise. It took me 40 years to learn what everybody had been telling me my entire life, which is moving around helps my mood. I know it's not rocket science, but it took me a long time to learn it. And so what I like to share is, again, also a simple thing that many of you already know. And that's why I emphasize here on how do you like to move your body. The trick, what finally helped me is find something you don't hate and then try to do that a little bit. So absolutely. So for me, as you might guess by the picture and my earlier mind map, for me, swimming helps me in every way. My spirit soothes me, good for my body, all the things. So find your thing that works for you and try to do that a little bit, and recognize sometimes maybe there's not moments where you're able to do that, and maybe there's too much on the plate or you're too tired. That's okay too. I don't think it has to be a zero-sum game all the time. Oh, I have to do this many times a week or not. In fact, they've even changed the recommendations. It used to be, they used to say 150 minutes of vigorous exercise a week, moderate to rigorous exercise, otherwise don't bother. Nobody said don't bother, but that was kind of the messaging. And thankfully that has changed. And now they are recognizing what is something that I find supportive across the board. And is in fact one of my mottos: something is better than nothing. Something is better than nothing. When you have a moment to yourself, that's better than no moment. When you're able to walk a little bit instead of walk for as long as you'd like, that's something. I think giving yourself credit and opportunity to do what you can, and recognizing there's moments where you can't do that for lots of reasons, that's all right too. But when you that's a resource that you can return to. And that's one of the things that I found really interesting about this whole process of finding wellness tools that really work for me, is finding that maybe there'll be moments where I'm not necessarily walking as much or not necessarily journaling as much, for example, other things that are helpful to me. but I know that those things are there. They're still resources. It's like a close friend that you haven't talked to for a long time, but the friendship is still meaningful. And when you talk to them, you pick up like no time has passed. These things are resources, even if they're not in our lives today. And so I love that idea of like building on what's already there, what's helped us in the past, what's brought us joy in the past. Beautiful, beautiful revelations in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing those. Another aspect of our lives that can really shore us up in terms of our wellness is creativity. Maya Angelou reminds us, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. And so this may be, a conventionally artistic activity, but it doesn't have to be. Anything, I think one of the things that makes us human is our creativity. Human beings have to be creative all the time. So you're being creative whether you want to or not. So what I'll invite you to do is, again, jot down for yourself or pop in the chat. How are you creative these days? And I always say these days because it changes over time, right? Like, let's say this week, how are you creative? Let's see, for me, oh, anyway, it's not about me. Thinking about how I've been creative. I organized something and it felt creative, I have to say. Drew a little bit. Oh, write a word picture. I love that. Stitching, cooking, beautiful. Yes, making cards for others. Ooh, I don't know what diamond painting is. I'm going to have to look that up. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, playing with little kids, grandkids, or little friends. That's right. I was doing Play-Doh with a little friend of mine. That absolutely is creative. Oh, rug hooking. I want to try that too. Beautiful. Oh, lovely. And so I'm seeing so many wonderful things out here. Such great examples. And many of you I see building the creativity piece, having that alongside nature as well. And we're going to talk about nature in a moment, but connecting with nature in whatever way you're able to and you enjoy is just such an important supportive thing that we can do for ourselves. I love all these examples. I'm so tempted to just like read the chat all day and see what everything everybody is saying, but I do understand I'm kind of supposed to be doing this workshop. So yeah, in what ways are you creative? So again, you're popping them in the chat or write them down for yourself. And I want to say, this is not an opportunity, or I don't design this to be an opportunity to say, oh, I used to do this, I should be doing this, I should be doing this, I know it helps me, I should be. Forget the shoulds. Put the shoulds aside. There's enough shoulds in this life. You have enough shoulds as care partners. Just forget about that for a moment and just think about, what am I doing at the moment that I'm getting a kick out of? And remember that you may have done things before that you can return to later. For example, some people are sharing knitting. So for me, there's periods of time where I knit and I find it very soothing, and then I lose interest for a while. It's all right. I still keep the yarn. Then I pick it up again. It doesn't have to be anything regimented. These are things that support us, that are our resources, that we can turn to, that are good for us, for our souls, for our well-being. Great examples coming up there. Thank you. So we talked about awareness, we talked about balance, and now I'd like to talk about connection for a moment. So the way that I talk about this, the way I've been talking about this for the last couple of years, is who's in your lifeboat. And sometimes, when we are supporting someone in whatever way, it feels like, and it can even be, that we're the only person in the lifeboat. And if that's the case, what can we do to bring others into the lifeboat for the person we're supporting, but also for ourselves? And because this workshop is focused on you, I want to think about who's in your lifeboat. So I'll invite you to jot this down for yourself. Everybody needs at least one other person in their lifeboat. Some people might have animals in their lifeboat, pets, absolutely, that counts. And this is people that and pets that you can count on, that are there for you, that add to your life, that the kids say that your ride or dies, but it's a boat, so it's your float or nope. Oh no, I shouldn't ad-lib there. So great, some great examples, popping them in the chat. Thank you, keep them coming. Who's in your lifeboat? Thank you. Great. And so this could be, I think there's lots of definitions of family. Personally, my family is my family of origin, but also my close friends. So also church community is a great example of another family. Oh, beautiful. I love that. Who's in your lifeboat? These are great, great. So keep them coming, and do jot this down for yourself as well. Who's in your lifeboat? I'm interested. I'm not sure if we can do show of hands. Can we do reactions with the webinar? You know what? Even if we can't, you can just put in a quick yes if anybody has heard of Susan Silk's ring theory. Anybody familiar with the comfort in, dump out model? If you have, just put a Y in the chat. And if you're saying no, I'll assume no. Because this is fairly new to me. A friend introduced this to me a couple of years ago, and I love it. Okay, good. So we're seeing most people know. Okay, no problem. Good. So this isn't old stuff to you. This is new. This is one of my favorite ways to think about and to live out support. So I'm going to explain it a little bit more, and then I'm going to give you the reference, and I'll invite you. My understanding is you will be able to see this webinar later, so you should be able to get the resources. And I can also make sure that the organizers have the resources that I've mentioned, so you can access them that way as well. Perhaps we can make sure that a PDF of this workshop is available as well. I'll figure that out later so that you can access that if you need resources. So let me just explain a little bit what this means. So Susan, a friend introduced this to me a couple of years ago, and it has been an incredible resource for me, and I've started sharing it with people. But I have to say, this is the first time I put it in a workshop, but I was using this myself recently, reflecting on my own ring, and it just has really been a game changer. So this article is called How Not to Say the Wrong Thing. I am sure in your journey of being a care partner that people in your life have said goofy stuff to you that was not supportive, that made you feel worse, that seemed super insensitive, that felt like they were on the other planet. I can't see you nodding, but I'm nodding. Many of us, and perhaps not in this particular experience of being a care partner, but perhaps in it's other experiences of your life where you have struggled, or you've been supporting somebody else who has struggled, and somebody, it's always a well-meaning person, really put their foot in it. And what we'd like to do is to make sure that that happens less. Now, what I don't want to do is put one more thing on your plate. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. What I am suggesting is that people want to show up in a way that's supportive, but a lot of times they flail around and don't know how to do it. So this ring theory, I'll go back to the picture for a moment. So at the middle, that the aggrieved or afflicted is the language she uses in talking about her own experience. So here, let me share from this article. So when Susan had breast cancer, we heard a lot of lame remarks. This is what the article says. But our favorite came from one of Susan's colleagues. She needed to visit Susan after the surgery, but Susan didn't feel like having visitors, and she said so. Her colleague's response, "This isn't just about you." "It's not?" Susan wondered. "My breast cancer is not about me. It's about you." So the same theme came up again when our friend Katie had a brain aneurysm. She was in intensive care for a long time and finally got out and into a step-down unit. She was no longer covered with tubes and lines and monitors, but she was still in rough shape. A friend came and saw her and then stepped into the hall with Katie's husband, Pat. "I wasn't prepared for this," she told him. "I don't know if I can handle it." This woman loves Katie, and she said what she did because the sight of Katie in this condition moved her so deeply. But it was the wrong thing to say, and it was wrong in the same way Susan's colleague's remark was wrong. So I would invite you to reflect, and if you like, pop in the chat a yes if you have ever felt like you had to hold somebody's hand through your hard thing. If you have ever had to make somebody farther removed from your situation feel better about it. Yes, there are lots of yeses. Good. I'm glad that you're seeing that in each other as well. This is a very common experience and a very unpleasant one. So what you are as a care partner is you're in the center there. You and the person you're supporting are in the center of, whatever it is in this particular moment. So what that means is the people in the outer circles, their job is to support you. The last thing you want is to hold their hand through your experience. Now, that doesn't mean this doesn't happen, but this tool, and I highly invite you to, when you're going through something, I have a friend who was dealing with a difficult diagnosis, and she sent this to those of us in her circle. Luckily, she was the one that introduced it to me originally, but many people found that very helpful, this article, because it was like, okay, this helps me sort out what to do and what not to do to be supportive. And it just let people know off the top. She said, you know, I can't hold your hand. I appreciate you being here for me, and you were entitled to your feelings about my diagnosis, but I can't be the one to hold your hand through that. You need to lean back on somebody in the outer rings. So the way that this works is you've got yourself and your care partner in the center, and then you are leaning out on other people. So everybody's circle is different, understandably. The other day I drew my own ring, but you don't have to do that, whatever works for you. So here are the rules, they say in this article. Here are the rules of ring theory. The person in the center can say whatever they want to anyone. That's the one benefit of being in the center of a difficult moment. That's what they say. But the people in outer circles, they also can have their feelings about it, but they need to put their feelings somewhere else, not on those in the center of the circle. So here are the rules. The person in the center ring can say anything she wants to anyone, anywhere. She can kvetch, complain, and whine, and moan, and curse the heavens, and say life is unfair, and why me? That's the one payoff for being in the center ring, says this article. When you are talking to a person in a ring smaller than yours, someone closer to the center of the crisis, the goal is to help. Listening is often more important than talking. But if you're going to open your mouth, ask yourself if what you're about to say is likely to provide comfort and support to that person in the inner ring. Don't, for example, give advice. You know this yourself, having probably been the recipient of unsolicited advice many times. People who are suffering from trauma don't need advice. They need comfort and support. So you can say something if you're supporting someone in an inner ring, you can say, I'm sorry, or this must be really hard for you, or can I bring you a pot roast? Don't say, you should hear what happened to me, or here's what I would do if I were you, or your painful moment is really hard for me. Those are the kind of things we don't want people to say. So I would invite you, and again, what I love so much about this model, this ring theory, is everybody's allowed to their feelings. But be sensitive, people. These are the people in your life, your outer rings, about where we put those feelings. And so I have seen this in action, both closer to the center of the ring and a little bit farther out. It can be really supportive because here, when we do it in the ring theory way, everybody is getting the support that they need, but the people closer to the center of the circle don't have additional people to manage, additional people to support in addition to what's in front of them. I rambled a little bit there. Does that feel free to put a question in the Q&A if you have something you'd like me to clarify about that. But I highly recommend you send this to the people in your life that are in the outer rings, because they may well benefit from this, and they may be insulted, but also if you send it to everybody, yes. So if somebody can put the link in the chat, that would be wonderful. You can also just Google Silk and Goldman. So one of the people from the society, or from Parkinson Canada, will do that. It's great wisdom coming out of the chat. Absolutely. Absolutely. People get you're absolutely right. People do sometimes confuse empathy with actual genuine empathy with making it about them. And that can be really draining for you. You don't have energy. When you're supporting somebody else, when you're in the middle of a crisis moment or a longer sustained difficulty, the last thing you need is to be holding other people's hands through your difficulty, right? I'm getting a little passionate about this because I do have some experience with this. Another resource to help your people show up. So I have been known to give this to people as a gift. You can also find it from the library. It is a beautiful book called There Is No Good Card for This: What to Say and Do When Life is Scary, Awful, and Unfair to the People You Love. I love this book in so many ways. You'll see the picture on the screen. It's beside my social work books, but I actually have found this to be more helpful than my social work books. And so, anybody who loves anybody can benefit from this book. So that's all of us, right? There's some great tangible stuff, like a list of go-to phrases, things that are less helpful, kinds of things you might offer, what you don't want to say to someone who is in pain. And some really, really great, it's a beautifully balanced book in terms of humor and resources and really great practical tips. I love this so much. And again, this is about, I found this helpful in terms of helping me to show up more sustainably. I'm really interested in how do we show up for other people in a sustainable way, in a way that we can manage in the long term. And so I found that this book is helpful in that for me as well. My next tip is to be in or near nature. A lot of people have mentioned these beautiful ideas already, and many beautiful ideas, I mean, in terms of you're connecting with nature. So if you're able to go outside, please do that. If you're not able to, what can you do to bring that outside in? So I'll invite you to jot down and share in the chat if you like, how are you connecting with nature these days? Thanks so much for those putting the things in the chat. I really appreciate that. Oh, I love this. Great ideas. Great ideas. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Oh, so many beautiful ideas. And you don't need any more suggestions. You've got so many going for you. But some of the things I do, I bring sea glass and stones into the house more than my partner would appreciate. They're covering every surface, plants inside, and then, being in the park, going down to the shore. I'm in Toronto myself. Getting out of the city when I can, when it's manageable. All of these are great. Oh, so many wonderful ideas there. Thank you for that. What are some other suggestions for opportunities for connection as well? This is not an exhaustive list. Just some other, connection is so central in terms of our own well-being. And there's different kinds of connections we need. We need spiritual connections. We need person connections. We need connections with nature, so many different ways. So here are some suggestions here, some of which I know that you're already connected to based on your answers so far. There's some other suggestions here as well: social time, humor, books, or other sort of platforms is not the right word, but other kinds of art forms. So books can be helpful as resources, as escape. They can also help us to feel like we're less alone. That's my favorite thing about books. But also movies, of course, shows, music, lots of people talking about how important music is, art of various kinds, creating, looking at, engaging in, listening to, physical activity in whatever way you enjoy and is manageable, creative work, whatever that means for you, cultural and community work. This could include volunteering. This could include activism. This could include, stuff connected to your faith community as well. Being in nature. And the last one but is kind of infused throughout all of these is reconnecting with meaning, hope, and purpose. And that's a lot of work has been done in terms of, tapping into what's meaningful. And sometimes this is easier said than done. Sometimes we have an underpinning of what's meaningful that helps carry us along. Sometimes we lose our footing in terms of finding that. And there might be something else that rises up to meet our feet in terms of what's meaningful. So that's not a static thing for most people. It changes in terms of what gives our life purpose and meaning as we go. So the last thing I'm going to invite you to do today before we open it up to questions is I'm going to invite you to take the last few minutes to reflect on filling your wellness toolbox. So this is a different way of doing the exercise we did at the beginning, the mind map or the flow chart. And so you can choose to do this however you want. Some of these are ones we've already talked about a little bit today. You can choose one of those questions to respond to. You can choose a couple. You can write the ones down that you're interested in and come back to them later. And I'm going to give you just a few minutes. Let's say I'm going to give you 4 minutes for this to work on your wellness toolbox. Now, once I drew my wellness toolbox and drew my various things inside, but that's great if you love drawing. Mine kind of looked like a kindergarten kid did it. So you have to, that's not the point. It's not about the outcome, it's about the process. But you can draw your wellness toolbox, you can paint it, you can write it, you can make a list, you can just reflect on it. You can make it part of a spiritual practice. You can do whatever you like, but choose one or more of these questions to respond to. And I'll give you 4 minutes to reflect on this. I would say 1 minute to finish up this reflection for now. Seeing some great responses in the chat, so feel free to start popping things in if you like. 1 minute to finish this reflection. Okay, beautiful. So I'm seeing so many great things coming up in the chat. And again, if you find any one of these useful in terms of taking forward, please do take anything that you find helpful moving forward. And we will turn this into a PDF and find a way to make this available to you, as well as my understanding is it has been recorded. So for those of you who didn't catch all of it, you should be able to catch it at the earlier part later. And what I want to note is that certainly the stuff we're talking about today doesn't mean that there isn't also hopelessness, that there isn't also grief and pain. And I'm not suggesting that these tools that we're talking about today, that they make that stuff go away. What I'm suggesting is that sometimes there are moments where we're able to hold both. And sometimes, we're feeling more well-resourced. And sometimes the despair is what we're feeling more at the forefront. And that's okay. And not only is that okay, that's completely understandable. And when we gather our resources, it doesn't mean that those resources are always going to be enough to help us get through the day. But it means that we do what we can in the moment. And when we're ready, that stuff is there for us. So, and again, it changes over time. It changes depending on what's going on in your process, in your life, and the people you're supporting. And sometimes, what you need is some rest primarily. And so what can you do to get some people in the lifeboat, or to get some other kinds of options there so that you can have a little bit of rest? So I think that's it for the main part of the presentation. There's me swimming again. You think I've talked about swimming enough? Yeah. People going through some really hard stuff. I'm seeing that in the chat. And I so appreciate you sharing that with us today. I really do. I'm so sorry this stuff is really hard.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for leading such a fabulous workshop. We now have time for some questions for Rebecca to answer. Some of them were submitted upon registration. So the first question that was submitted was, what can someone do if they're feeling burnt out all the time?
Okay, so first thing I want to say is that is so understandable. Sometimes we tell ourselves, or other people tell us, you shouldn't feel burnt out, you shouldn't do this. Or sometimes what's even harder to hear is, you're doing great, you've got it all together, you're so strong, blah, blah, blah. A person can be strong and burnt out. And in fact, most of us are that sometimes at the same time, right? So I think the first step is just acknowledging to yourself, to someone you trust, I'm feeling this. I am burnt out. And sometimes we need different things in different moments. I do want to, again, that's a big topic. So I'll just give some little tidbits for now. I recently read a book about burnout that I really, really love. It's called, I'll pop it in the chat, and then maybe somebody can put in the full reference. It's called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And I read other things about this before, but I really found this to be very helpful in terms of realistic, empathetic, kind, and practical in terms of course you're burnt out. Of course you're burnt out. And what are some things that can help you to move through that? Recognizing it's not your fault you're burnt out. That's the other piece. Sometimes we feel burnt out because we think we're not doing a good enough job. Nope.
Do you think you could stop sharing your screen, and then we can have a bigger picture of the book you were holding up?
I am so sorry. I completely forgot about that. Thanks, everybody, for your patience.
Can you show us the book again?
Yes, I can. Thank you for your patience. Let me try to get that right in the screen there. It's called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And so that's one that I in particular have found quite supportive and useful in recent days. And that's just a quick answer for that one. I know it's a bigger topic, but I just really want to emphasize, of course you're burnt out. And I am sorry that you are having to hold that heaviness, but I completely, you are completely entitled to it. You're completely entitled to it. And sometimes just naming it is different than what we've been doing. Although not you, because you did mention it. So what is the other question, Donna?
There's another question. Actually, there was a couple that came in with a sort of a similar theme.
Great.
About feeling guilt. One was about feeling guilt about when they're feeling frustrated with their loved one. They said that sometimes they think their partner might be wallowing in their times of misery, and they won't try things that have been suggested. That makes them feel miserable. And they just sort of feel like they don't want to be there when they're being like that. So sometimes they leave or they get annoyed, which they know is unkind. And then another person feels that they feel like they're being robbed of their own life. They love their partner and they want to do everything they can for them so they have a comfortable life, but they feel like they're neglecting themselves and feeling guilty for feeling that way. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to perhaps what self-care strategies people can use when they're feeling those feelings of guilt or frustration.
So guilt is big, especially when you are supporting somebody else, when you are caring for somebody else, or walking alongside somebody else. Guilt is a huge piece. And what I've been doing in terms of thinking about guilt and reading about guilt in the last few years is, it took me a long time to learn this, and I thought it was really revelatory at the time. But guilt, actually, we don't have to act on guilt. Guilt just gives us information. Like other feelings, guilt gives us information. It's not a fact. It's just telling us we're having a feeling. For many, many years, if I felt guilty about something, I thought, oh, that's bad. I can't do that, or I have to do the opposite thing. Sometimes to take a little bit of space from your guilt, let it be there. It's there. I feel guilty. Okay, that's all right. And sometimes that may give us some information about our next steps. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a feeling. And what I want to share with you about guilt, this is one of my favorite quotes on guilt. Beautiful book, highly recommend. Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover-Tawwab. And again, I will put together a list of these resources, but I find this to be super helpful in terms of setting boundaries in a variety of different relationships. And she talks about guilt in this one section. And she says, the number one question I'm asked about setting boundaries is, how can I set one without feeling guilty? My immediate thought is, she said, you can't. Coping with discomfort is a part of the process of establishing a boundary. It is okay to feel guilty. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It is okay to feel annoyed. It is okay to take some space in a way that's manageable and safe. It's okay. Sometimes we are told again and again, if you feel guilty, that means you're doing something wrong. That's what I thought for most of my life. I still struggle with that. But actually, again, feeling guilty sometimes gives us some information. Sometimes it's just there. It's an old thing that comes up for us. It's an old thing we can lean on. It doesn't necessarily mean, it's not necessarily telling us the truth. Letting the guilt sit there, sitting with the discomfort, actually is more helpful in terms of moving through it and giving it the opportunity to transform into the next feeling or add something else, rather than getting stuck in, how do I stop myself from feeling guilty? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes in my effort to stop myself from feeling guilty or to get the guilt away, I create a new feeling for myself, which is resentment, which is also a very understandable feeling and a very common one for anybody doing support work or care work in any way. So, resentment, guilt, neither of them feel good. It doesn't mean they're bad feelings. It's just what's there in this moment.
Great, thank you. So here's another one that I know that people often speak on, and I'll read out one of the comments. It said, losing my spouse to dementia has been harder on both of us than the physical symptoms of Parkinson's. They can't express themselves, so they shut down. And they were grieving. They were saying, I miss my best friend. And I know people who are care partners often feel that way about grief in general. So I'm wondering if you could maybe discuss some coping strategies for people who are experiencing grief as care partners.
So that's a big one, because I think grief is an ongoing thing. And so at various stages in this process, in this journey, you might feel guilty or grief rather in different ways. And so again, just by naming it, that is a step in, that is a wellness tool in itself. saying that to yourself, writing it down, saying it to someone you trust, saying it to a spiritual care provider, to somebody else in your life. Sometimes it might be saying it with the person in your life you're supporting. It might be the person with PD, perhaps, that you talk about the grief, maybe not. It depends on lots of things, where you're at, what feels manageable for you, and so on. But it's okay to name that grief. And again, that's just a step. But I think, I have had some very wise counsel over the years in terms of feeling my feelings, in terms of pushing it away, in terms of only putting somebody else's feelings first. We can't actually be responsible for somebody else's feelings. They're going to have their feelings. We're going to have our feelings. And so, finding a safe place to process that grief and recognizing it will come in different moments and it will take different shapes. And, that's an ongoing thing. Unfortunately, that's not just a one step thing. Well, none of this stuff is a one-step thing, but finding people that you can turn to, finding a place to say, this is really hard, I miss who the person was. Finding a place to say that is whatever that means for you, in whatever way that feels good for you, I think is a start.
Great, thank you. So this is a longer question, and it sort of has to do with that, finding the people that help with the support.
Mm-hmm.
Someone commented that they have a friend that they were at one time mutually supportive. Then some things happened, lost a spouse, someone has a parent with Parkinson's, and they're thinking maybe it's become exacerbated because of Parkinson's. But now that other person is quite negative. So when they go and do things together, the other person is quite negative. And so they've made suggestions like, let's just enjoy the flowers or the beautiful day instead of talking about, all the terrible things that might be happening with other family members, for example. And they're wondering, how can they redirect their time together to focus on the more positive things which make them both feel better instead of just feeling like they're dumping on each other?
I hear that, and that's a tricky one. And I think it depends a lot on the relationship. It depends. A conversation around this might be directly with the person. Depends on that can be helpful, but it depends on what outcome you'd like to see, right? It can be, but I think again, the boundaries book, going back to setting boundaries in terms of like, these are some things that I need as well, because it's not sustainable for us to be in friendships that only deplete us. What we need is to shore up the things in our life that nurture us and supplement the things that deplete us. And oftentimes it's the same thing or the same person that can be nurturing and depleting, right? So that's a longer conversation as well. Sorry, I can't give you something more comprehensive in this short time we have together. But I think recognizing what you need, and having, making sure, or not making sure, this isn't yours to make sure, but trying to see who else that person has in their life as well, because that's one of the reasons why it's always helpful to have a couple of people in the lifeboat, because sometimes people aren't available, and sometimes you might need to step back because you're not getting what you need in that moment either. And so when it can help if you know that there's other people in the mix too. I just want to share one thing that I learned years ago when I was volunteering at a shelter in New Orleans, and I was really struggling at the time. And it was really time for me to go. I was not in any position to be supportive. I was really struggling myself, but I felt really guilty. I felt really bad because I said I was going to be there. I said I was going to be there for 3 months. So I better be here for 3 months, even though I was really not doing anybody any good, including myself. And so when I was trying to figure out whether or not to leave, and I'm not suggesting that's the case in terms of leaving the friendship, but when I was trying to figure out whether or not to leave, the person who ran the shelter said the most beautiful thing to me that I've never forgotten. She said, "This place is bigger than any one of us." And whenever I feel like I am the only resource in this other person's life, I am the only aspect that's supportive for them, it can help me to think about, okay, so what can we do to shift that? What else collaboratively, what can we bring another activity in? Can we bring another person in? Can we bring some more plants in? Other resources take different forms. They're not always people. But what else can we do to bring that in so it's not all, I'm not holding all of it all the time alone, right? We want, and I saw some people saying they're feeling less connected from other people. Sometimes the people we're connected to changes. And sometimes we need to reach out and bring people in. Sometimes people want to support us, but they don't know how. They're flustered, they're in a tizzy. They need us to help them a little bit. That can be tiring, but sometimes it's worth it to ask people, this is what I need. Are you able to do this?
Great, thank you so much. Well, we've just about run out of time. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a very special thank you to our workshop leader, Rebecca Higgins. This workshop has provided us with some invaluable tools that we can all use to fill our own wellness toolboxes by focusing on our own individual strengths and resources. I know we haven't been able to answer all of the questions submitted here today, so please know that our information and referral team are available weekdays to discuss your individual situations with you, to answer your questions, and to provide you with resources. To reach Parkinson Canada's information and referral team, you can call them at 1-800-565-3000 or email them at information.referral@parkinson.ca. During our next webinar on Wednesday, July 27th, we will be introducing you to the Canadian version of Every Victory Counts, produced in partnership between the Davis Phinney Foundation for Parkinson's and Parkinson Canada. So watch your email inboxes for more details and the registration link. On behalf of all of us at Parkinson Canada, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.